Today I'm going to review a lens. The brand of this lens. Yes, how to pronounce it? Astrhori. Astrhori. I tried this brand and with another name of Rockstar. By the way, this brand has announced that they will discontinue the name of Rockstar and continue with Astrhori only in the future. This is a 50mm with f1.4 aperture, a fast lens. And why do I review this lens with you? Whether it's for hobby or working, I love to explore any other options besides those existing big brands, especially to see if I can find some products with a very good cost-effective value. And so we can have more alternatives or options. But of course, if it has to sacrifice the quality, then it's not worth buying it. And so I'm eager to test how the quality is of such equipment. Finally, they have to gain our support for further development. For example, the Korean Samyang. At first, it was also not very popular, but with the good quality and good cost-effective performance of their products, now this brand gains much more users. And thus, it's not because of where did it make. I just want to try any new and especially not yet popular products in the market. I will say that even without tests before, there's hardly really bad products now. Since under globalization, a product may involve many different manufacturers or parts from all over the world. So maybe such factory has already got much experience before as an OEM, and then they started their own brand and mostly are manual lenses with a relatively inexpensive price. This Rockstar has produced many kick-style lenses with smaller aperture. There is also a 35mm f1.8, and this 15mm 1.4 is quite special since it equips with the tilt function. And you can find out such tilt lens concept from those old box style cameras. You can tilt and shift the lens with those cameras. Yes, the whole function of the moving axis should be tilt and shift combined together. Tilt up and down, and then shift left and right horizontally or vertically. But this lens can only offer tilt functions. And you can see that originally, the lens focal plane is perpendicular to the sensor, and once it moves, it will then alter the focal plane angle, and then create a new result of the depth of field. And such kinds of lenses are mainly for those miniature effects. I don't try to show it here, since I think most of you have known such effects already. And even without the tilt function, it's still a unique 50mm fast lens with an aperture of f1.4. It can cover the full frame sensor. The lens mount provided include all mirrorless cameras. For example, the Z, the RF, the M, the M4, the Sony E, or this one, Fuji X. And it seems it didn't provide for DSLR. Using it on my Fujifilm or any APS-C camera, it will then have a focal length equivalent of 1.5 or 1.6 times crop factor. I will say that it is better for portrait, and of course you may use it for shooting anything, but I think it will be better for portrait. It seems it's quite a good fast prime lens. And then let's see the body's quality first. It's very solid, made with metal. The lens mount is also made with metal. Unlike the traditional manual lenses for still photo, it equips with trackless focus and aperture ring. The rings turn very smooth, very good for focus or iris shifting during shooting, since it moves really smooth. The focus flow is quite long. The minimum focus is, yes, 0.5 meter, 1.6 feet. And you can see that the focus flow get around, yes, didn't reach 180 degrees, but around 160 degrees. What does it stand for? The longer focus flow means better details in focusing. It's really good for filmmaking. And only after 10 feet, it then approaches the infinity focus. And I will say that this lens is quite good for video shooting. roughly studied this lens and found that the quality is not bad. You can feel the range even with such a tiny size. The front range diameter is 46 mm. You may know that many Lumix or Olympus lenses are having this same diameter, and so it's not difficult to pair it with suitable NDs or other filters. And here, I've made an unscientific measurement. I tried to measure the internal diameter and got 33 to 34 mm, and divided by 50 mm, and the result is quite nearly 1.4. Yes, not so scientific, but the claimed f1.4, I think it is believable. Roughly, I will examine a lens in 5 aspects. First of all, the sharpness. Of course, before go deep into another aspect, we must ensure the sharpness first. We won't like to use a lens without adequate sharpness. This one is okay. And as I said before, there's hardly very poor lens now. With the advanced technology and especially CNC technique, lens can be well made and accurately polished. Unlike tens of years ago, a relatively cheap lens may have really bad image reproduction. From the photos I shot with the wide open aperture of f1.4, you can find that the center part is very sharp, and apart from the core part seems a bit softened. Actually, this is not the defect of this lens, but instead an optical phenomenon of f1.4 large aperture, a certain kind of characteristic. Of course, once you are shooting with f1.4, you merely want a very shallow depth of field. So otherwise, you won't apply f1.4 aperture. And I think this softened area is still quite natural. And most important, the center part is still very sharp, even under 200% magnification. On the other hand, if you close one stop to f2 aperture, the photo will turn out very sharp as a whole. So if you're going to take certain all sharp photos, for example landscape photos, I will suggest it's better to close at least one stop of aperture to f2. I also tried with f11 and f5.6. It seems it didn't better than the f2, and I can say that the whole sharpness can be achieved with f2 already. Regarding the color reproduction, I will test when I was still shooting with film, but I won't do that now, since no way you can have an answer. Why? In the era of shooting with film, we can't have a control over two aspects, the image contrast and color saturation. If you really want to touch it, you can only do it during the film develop process. You can change the response through over or under develop of the film. Use same procedure to change the response of color saturation. Once the film was well processed, you can change nothing. That's why there are so many film stocks. You may choose different sensitivity, contrast, and also the color reproduction. That's also why we would test the color reproduction of a lens in the past. Is it having a cooler or warmer biases, or is it less color saturated? But the results can only be found with one-by-one comparison of another lens. And in the era of digital, I no longer test this item since the saturation or the contrast can be adjusted in your camera. And if you shoot RAW, you can manipulate any aspect of your photos. The lens is just an eye, so I don't test this item. I will try to figure out if there is any distortion, mostly for wide-angle lenses. And I will say that distortion doesn't mean a defect. Some photographers prefer there's a little bit of distortion, since that will enhance a bit of the three-dimensional feeling. And as said before, I will test the distortion if there's a wide-angle lens. But I won't expect there will be any distortion for a 50mm lens. And regarding distortion, there's also the perspective distortion. Perspective distortion should be considered for video shooting. Most lenses will not produce distorted image when the object has reached its closest focus point. But when you pan the camera, image distortion may occur through the edge of the lenses, and this is the so-called perspective distortion. But many people neglect to test this item. And regarding this 50mm lens, I will say that with focal length higher than 35, perspective distortion won't be obvious, not to mention this 50mm lens. And I have placed the box as close as possible to the closest focus of 1.6 feet. I really love using this little box for camera testing. The texture is really a challenge of sharpness for a camera or a lens. Even in the closest focus of 1.6 feet, there is low image distortion. As said before, you can hardly expect there is image distortion for a 50mm lens. The metal lens body is quite solid, and besides, even the manufacturer didn't mention if that's dust or showerproof. We have to test it. I use it for a few days in a normal manner, not overly care of it. In just this short time, there's not any problem, but I'm curious about a tilt lens like this. There may be an opportunity for dust to accumulate in the ball head area. There is a ring here, and you may loosen it to adjust the ball head. Tighten it back after adjusting the angle, so it's quite hard to clean it once there is dust here. And so I would recommend, if you are going to shoot with such kind of lenses in certain challenging circumstances, you can cover this area with a little piece of cloth or paper. By the way, may I emphasize that this lens is equipped with a 12 brace aperture. It's quite impressive since many lenses today are only consisting of 8 or 9 brace. So you can see that the aperture circle is very round in shape, and it can be perceived that the broken will be also very round in shape. I've mentioned before, the sharpness is not the main factor to reflect the high prices of a lens or to decide if there is a better lens or not. Instead, the anti-flares capability is one of the most crucial factors. Flares will damage your image, affect the saturation, and even the sharpness. I tried facing the sun with this lens, and you can see that when I close the aperture, there is a beautiful star-shaped light spot, mainly contributed by the 12 brace aperture. And after I continuously open the aperture and with a lot of sunlight going in, the color and sharpness are still not be really affected. Of course, it's overexposed, and during the adjustment of the aperture, the iris ring is very smooth. This should be the basic performance of such kind of manual lenses. For this test, I found that the capability of anti-flares of this lens is quite okay. But in reverse speaking, for a lens with the good anti-flares ability, it's quite difficult to create those flares effects. For example, with this lens, it can still create a rainbow circle with direct sunlight, but there aren't any multiple flare spots. Again, you have to add on other glass filters for such flare spots if needed. I brought the lens to the field test. I tried to shoot with a continuous swapping of focus. For this 160 degree of focus flow, the process is smooth and the focus is easily targeted. I think this lens is quite suitable for video shooting. The ergonomic design of the focus and aperture ring is very good, easy access and smooth. And on the other hand, a lens with tilt function. What can we do with this function? Since the miniature effect can be achieved with the built-in digital filter. Nevertheless, there is a limitation with those digital filters, and only with a tilt lens you can select the position of the miniature effect. However, I'm thinking if I don't touch with the miniature effect? Can I use this lens to alter the original depth of field effect? Here, I'm shooting a photo of a car. Since a car is a relatively big object, ordinarily speaking, it's not easy to achieve a shallow depth of field even with a fast full-frame lens. Here you can see that with a 50mm f1.4, the depth of field is already quite shallow. Or if I try to adjust the tilt angle of the lens, you may achieve a very exaggerated result. Or of course, you can select a more reasonable effect with it. Actually, I think it can help to further enhance the shallow feeling of depth of field. And finally, it can be useful in highlighting certain products or making portraits with super shallow depth of field. I have some suggestions for improvement of this lens. Since it's a tilt lens, no problem if you are going to utilize this function. But if I want to revert it as a normal lens, I have to spend extra effort to verify, like this. I think the factory could label certain marks onto the ball head. Very easy, just make some marks every 90 degrees. Easier for user to revert the lens to the normal condition. And there is also benefit for having marks if you want to repeat the tilt movement precisely during filming. For example, NG and retake. Those marks would have big helps. The second point is, for these manual lenses, the factory has offered nearly all types of mount for mirrorless camera. But I want to say that, why do we buy the native mount lenses of that brand? Mainly because we want to have those electronic functions that includes autofocus, auto iris, and the ibis function. But for this lens, we will never get those native electronic functions. So, what's the benefit of having a native lens mount for this lens? Maybe no need to change the adapter and simply put on when you shoot. But if I just want to buy one this lens for all of my mirrorless cameras, it's then mission impossible. Since lens for mirrorless cameras must fit with the corresponding camera, so in my opinion, they can also produce some lens for DSLR mount, for example, EF mount. The advantage of DSLR lens is they can easily fit for any mirrorless camera by just adding with an adapter. In that way, if I really love this lens and I want to use it with all my different mirrorless cameras, then I would prefer this lens equipped with the DSLR mount. I only need to buy several adapters to fully utilize it. Finally, the third point, price. I think this lens has a quite good cost-performance ratio, but not extremely impressive. It was sold at AliExpress and Amazon for a price of $250, around Hong Kong dollar 2,000. You can find that there is a Canon 50mm f1.4, which is sold at about also Hong Kong 2,000 as parallel imports. Of course, the Sigma HSM Art 50mm is more expensive, and there are also many lenses are more expensive than this Astrhori. Nevertheless, there are still many options within the Hong Kong $2,000 range. I will conclude that this lens is really not bad. For this price, you can have a fast 50mm lens, not bad. And furthermore, I found an extra benefit of this lens which benefits video shooting. On many occasions, once the lens is attached to the camera, the marking on the lens body are fixed at a certain position or angle. But you can alter the marking to any position through this tilt function. Make it on the top position, or to your left or your right, or even to the bottom. It's really useful for video shooting.